Blessings in Jesus' mighty name. Glory to God. So what do they do when people can't control you? When they can't access you spiritually? How do they try to manipulate you then? What they try to do is claim a greater negative effect on you than they actually contribute to. So, for example, if you identify something and it's not really affecting you as it once did, then the person who's trying to negatively affect you has to try to overstate their own involvement. It's like they will even claim responsibility for things they haven't done wrong to you, just so you will place your negativity on them and hate on them, because that gives them a tendril. It gives them a hook in your life. And there are people thinking upon those malicious lines. Witches and wizards who serve Satan and his kingdom are intending to basically have such a negative effect on people that what's actually going to result is the destruction of their soul. So what they're trying to do effectively is lead people to death and hell, simply by causing a negative effect on them. Now, when you can't have a negative effect on somebody, what's left? If your sole job is to get negative reactions out of people, but in ways that don't what's the word I'm looking for? Incriminate you. So if you're looking to, as a witch or wizard, negatively affect somebody, you're trying to do so with impunity. That's why they hide. That's why they hide in the witchcraft covens and lodge rooms. That's why they use demons to implement that negative effect. Mostly. Because demons can do these evil things with impunity, because there's no social expectation upon them and no physical, visible manifestation of them. So they try to implement or accentuate the negative effect that people in the environment are having on you by emboldening it, highlighting it, pouring fuel on it in the spirit realm, out of sight. So, very simply, when demons realize we're not really having the effect that we once had on this person, they're too clean. God has cleaned them too much. The desires of their heart have changed. They're not a slave to the things that we have power over. How are we going to negatively affect them? So they start throwing struggles at you like spells. They start spell casting. Like, gilly gilly, give that man some digestive problems. Like, what you have to understand about them is they're spirit entities. So they're trying to struggle you, they're trying to give you symptoms, but they work off your own psychological beliefs, especially incorrect ones. So firstly, they try to lead you to the incorrect belief about your own situation and its cause, so that they can perpetuate it or escalate it. So they don't need the thing you're thinking to be true. So they lie. They lie to you. They give you false diagnosis. And they try to lead your thinking about your own life along negative lines. That's why we're told in the Bible, cast all your troubles on the Lord. You see, it does say in the Bible, it's a sick man who needs a physician. Yes, it is a sick man who needs a physician, that's right. But if you go to a physician who's corrupt, what good did he give you and do you? None. Or if you go to a physician when you don't actually need one, because your calamity or your affliction, infirmity is that of a spiritual nature, it's been inflicted spiritually, it's affecting your flesh, it's having real physical symptoms on you, but its source is spiritual, and you're going to try and find the physical cause, you'll never find it, because the cause is spiritual. So they play on that. They play on the administration. They play on the frustrations that might arrive of your trying to seek the root cause of a sickness that you're living through, when actually the cause is spiritual. It's a spell. It's some witches and wizards and demons who basically try to wield blackness, darkness, and spell casting to cause calamity and affliction in your life. It's actually them doing it. So the people around you in the streets who are smiling to you day to day are actually the ones, when they go home, are over the witchcraft coven, in the lodge room with the demons, trying to cast spells to make you sick. So they're sort of before the angel elect and God, saying, that's not too bad what we did to him. He's not going to die, it's not going to kill him. Yet they know that. They know that it's just going to lead to your suffering and not your actual death or any permanent harm, but they play on the fact that you don't know that, because you're a mere man. That's how evil they are. That's where they reside. They reside in your ignorance. The devil is in the detail. So if you lack knowledge of a detail, the devil would exploit it. Why? Because if they can continue to lead you to believe that the physical infirmity is one of a physical root and not of a spiritual root, then they can continue afflicting you, because you're sort of speaking it onto yourself. And why? Because they attack you where your head's at. So if your head is saying, I'm sick and I'm tired of being sick and they can't find it, maybe they can get you whinging and moaning and complaining and bitching and putting all of your focus on that. Now, it does ultimately lead to exposing a corrupt medical system. It does, because the system is innately corrupt. And they don't want to tell you you're sick or healthy. Do you see the point? They just don't want to give you any resolve in your head. Because if you think, well, I'm sick, there's nothing I can do about it. There is an element of resolve in that. At least you know you're sick and you know what it is. And you know, therefore, the prognosis and what's causing it and contributing to it. And you can at least do your best with whatever's in your power to fix it. And that there is a sort of a resolve in that, because you've done all you can. But when you don't know what the cause is, when you don't know what the root is, when you don't know, because you've sought diagnosis and you're being let down at every stage by your fellow man, which is a very ugly thing, because your fellow man's supposed to love you and care about you, especially when you pay him hard-earned money. But they don't care about money. They just keep collecting the cash while they're harming everybody around them, and the demons help them to do it. Because it does harm somebody to leave them in ignorance when you can take them out of it. That absolutely harms them. Jesus said, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. So if you're somebody who knows and you deliberately don't tell somebody something you know, you're deliberately harming the person you haven't told. Deliberately. That is direct harm, but they claim it isn't. They claim, I'm not harming that person. I didn't actually do any physical harm. Oh, haven't you? Do you think a person going on in harmful action or thought processes on foot of you failing to do your job hasn't harmed them? It hasn't harmed them visibly. There's no paper trail. You can't say, because of that type of medical negligence, very clearly and very certainly attach the harm that accrued to that person. That's a very difficult process, and they know it. How do you really attach that they harmed you by not telling you something? That's very difficult to prove in a court of law. So that's what they do. Because it's the easiest way to appear as though they've acted with impunity. They're blameless in it, in other words. Because you can't very easily tie your harm to their shortcoming and their failure to diagnose, and you can't necessarily say that they deliberately failed to diagnose. So that's why they operate in those spaces. Wherever there's any degree or potential for lack of clarity, they favour that. They are in the muddy water. They're pigs. So pigs dwell in the muddy puddle, in the muddy water. You see the point? And they love it. Oh, this is great opportunity. They see it as an opportunity to harm you and destroy your soul. They're murderous pigs. They're hell pigs. They're Satan's hell pigs. And you'll see that on the day of judgment, but it'll be too late if you don't come to Jesus. They have hated your life. They have hated your soul. They have hated the bones of you, that they would hunt you into the fires of hell. Do you understand? That the devil's children, God calls them the devil's children for a reason. They hate you. So when you consider that there is an amount of ambiguity where the devil dwells, that is why it is in the interest of any nation, any doctor, anybody in any field to remove ambiguity, to remove any potential for ambiguity. Of course, that's not always 100% possible, but it is in the rudiments. In the basics, it is possible, absolutely, to remove all ambiguity in the rudiments, in the fundamentals. And that's what really, for example, that's what the Constitution of Ireland is. It's rudimentary in many ways. But it's also very, very sophisticated. So it's sophisticated rudiments. In other words, you have to have a very, very extensive knowledge to understand why the basics have to be such. Which is wisdom. Wisdom is like a greater form of knowledge because it instructs all knowledge. So there has to be wisdom exemplified in the Constitution. It has to be central to it. And so you need foresight, hindsight, insight. You need intuition from God. Because He's ultimately the source of wisdom, the head of godliness, the head of righteousness, the head of good. So He is at the centre of well-functioning systems, His wisdom. So wisdom is not personal to anybody but God. Do you see? He gives us our wisdom, His wisdom, which we can express and we can sort of call it ours. But it's His wisdom. So we're to implement in our systems to avoid harm, to avoid harm, His wisdom. So we implement God's wisdom to avoid our own harm. And this requires the removal of ambiguity, because pigs like muddy water. So it makes sense that pigs would lead you to ambiguity. What does it say in the Irish legislature now? Presumptively constitutional. What's that? Ambiguity. Uncertainty. Presumptively means what? We lack evidence to confirm. We can't prove it as such. We can't prove it as constitutional. because the word presume is a synonym with assume, or interchangeable, or an alternative word or similar word. Synonym is the word we use to coin the phrase. And so a synonym for presume is assume. And what does assume mean? It means to lack the evidence to confirm. So if you're assuming something or presuming something, because they're the same word really in this context, something as constitutional, you're making a claim actually. You're not failing to make a claim, as they would lead you to believe they are. They are actually making a claim, and they are actually pinning their flag to the mast. They are claiming that there is a lack of knowledge or proof or evidence, in other words, to confirm whether a legislature is or is not constitutional. And what that means is basically the President of Ireland, custodian of the Constitution, the one who basically it all boils down to his desk, and he considers whether a bill is added to the legislature or not. So he has to be studied in constitutional law to avoid adding anything to the legislature which isn't constitutional or that fights against the Constitution. So basically, if he's adding stuff to the legislature which fights against the Constitution, he's not doing his job. His job is to make sure that what's added to the legislature is constitutional. Now they're basically claiming that they have legislated such that he doesn't have to check as a prerequisite condition to adding something to the legislature that it is in fact constitutional first. And so they're basically telling him, no, add whatever you want and we'll just presume it's the law. I'm being serious. The term presumptively constitutional has been added to the legislature in Ireland, and they're basically telling them they can do whatever they want in terms of pass any bill, and we have to, as the people, presume that it's lawful. When it's not. First of all, the way they're running their office is unlawful and criminal and seditious. For all of the aforementioned reasons, doesn't remove ambiguity, doesn't certainly uphold the Constitution of Ireland, doesn't satisfy the conditions of being the President of Ireland, doesn't satisfy the prerequisite conditions to adding something to the legislature, that of course it must be constitutional first, because it wouldn't be reasonable to add stuff to the legislature that fights against your own constitution. That would be foolish, unwise, counterproductive and counterintuitive. It would be nonsense. So you can't have stuff being claimed as law that isn't law, but that's effectively what they're trying to do. So it's very, very serious crime what they're doing, because they're telling us that we must presume something is lawful such that we would obey it under threat or duress of arrest and imprisonment should we fail to do so. So this is not just, by the way, I just presume it's constitutional there till we check it. It's been brought before the High Court for testing, and they abandoned the test of it, and then the Court of Appeal, on foot of a judicial review of said court case in the High Court, ruled that we must presume it constitutional when they didn't even check it either. So nobody checked it, yet the Court of Appeal in Ireland are ruling that we must presume it's the law. So the Court of Appeal, 3 judges of the Court of Appeal are telling us that they're incapable of upholding the law in Ireland. If they're telling us to presume something lawful, they're basically admitting that they are incapable of doing their job. So Miss Justice Yvonne Phelan, incapable of completing the task of testing the constitutionality of sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006, which tell guards they can prosecute in court when the High Court says in another case that they can't, and that, because they're not lawyers, basically, and they have to act with impunity and impartiality and presume everybody innocent. they're only allowed to give their own evidence. They're not allowed to give evidence of another, which was another matter raised in the testing of those sections. And so what are we seeing? We're basically seeing that the High Court and the Court of Appeal are committing treason conspiratorially. They're planning it together. It's not coincidental that they're both failing to uphold the law and telling the public to continue. Well, the High Court says it remains an open question whether it's constitutional or not. The Court of Appeal says we must presume it is constitutional, while both of them fail to test it. I mean, that tells you that this is an extremely corrupt action, seditious and counterproductive and treasonous, because it is a betrayal of our very own constitution. If you're writing legislature that's against the constitution, you are a criminal. If you're facilitating anything that would lead to ambiguity surrounding legislature as to its constitutionality, then you are effectively committing sedition, because whether or not it has been proven in a court of law that what you legislated is unconstitutional, the mechanisms through which that has occurred, where you're only presuming something constitutional, is in essence a betrayal of the systems which preserve the upholding of the Constitution. So either way, you are basically decomposing the Constitution of Ireland and the integrity and the effectiveness of the offices which are designated to uphold it. So you are effectively committing sedition and treason, and not on your own, but conspiratorially, with Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan, Michael D. Higgins, the Court of Appeal, and whoever's involved in the processes of legislation. Because now they're claiming the President, who's custodian of the Constitution, doesn't have to uphold it. In a roundabout way. He can add things to the legislature, bills to the legislature which aren't constitutional, but we have to pretend they are. Very serious crime. I mean, this is stuff where you could spend a life in prison for doing it. Like for treason and sedition and any act that allows for ambiguity or uncertainty as to what the law is and should be, anything that contributes to such uncertainty is satanic. It is the devil, and it is, for those very reasons, all of the aforementioned, treasonous, because it betrays the people, because the people hand the Constitution to the government in the full knowledge that their duty then as the government is to uphold the Constitution. Now, if the government are allowing for procedures which give the illusion that they don't have to uphold the Constitution or test bills or for their constitutionality prior to adding them to the legislature, then they are committing treason, because it betrays the people who pay them to uphold the Constitution. And be certain that any legislatures added are in fact constitutional prior to adding them. And it's not like they lack faculty. I mean, the President should be studied in constitutional law. But he's not operating on his own in that aptitude either, because there are many who are studied in constitutional law, barristers, solicitors and a whole lot. And even members of Garda Síochána to some extent have studied the Constitution. So there's no real excuse among them. They all know basically the rudiments, and should, and if they don't, they're incapable and inept at doing their job and fulfilling their office and task. So we as the people of Ireland can't really excuse this. And so because it is, as I've described, it is treason, because treason is a betrayal of the state. It's a betrayal of the function of the state. I'm not talking about, fighting against the individuals in government. I'm talking about they're fighting against the function of government. Its core and root function, the rudiments of the effectiveness of the implementation of the offices within the organs of state. That is, in effect, treason. And it is also sedition, because it is overthrow of the effectiveness of the offices of the organs of state. So it is treason and it is sedition. The very term presumptively constitutional, which is what? Ambiguity. But ambiguity is there because it's designed to allow criminal activity. Remember? The devil's in the detail. So the criminal activity comes through the ambiguity. The ambiguity is the crack in the wall that they're squeezing through. And currently they're trying to do that through the term presumptively constitutional. So this term is sedition. And it has allowed for further sedition. I mean, I say allow, it's not that it's permissible or lawful, it's just has given them the opportunity to commit those offences and tried to hide them as lawful because of the legislatures they snuck in to create the facade that they're not breaking the law when they are. Very, very extremely seriously. Such that they would have been killed years ago for doing it. But they removed the death penalty, but it's still a very serious penalty, like life imprisonment, for doing what they're now doing. So this is really serious stuff. Really, really serious. Because they're fighting against your constitution, Ireland, and that is the common good and the effectiveness of the systems that preserve our children and our nation. And the integrity of the household, the family unit. So they're fighting against us. Our own government are fighting against our families and our inheritance and the children's inheritance in terms of inheriting the Constitution in its effectiveness and its full effectiveness, and inheriting their rights that are enshrined in the Constitution and preserved therein, by not implementing the Constitution fully and properly. So these are highly criminal activities. Legislating for a term like presumptively constitutional is firstly idiotic, but secondly it's seditious and treasonous. And these are very, very serious crimes for a member of an organ of state to commit. Very serious. I mean, this is holding the gun to your children's head. These men in your government are now putting a gun to your children's head. Now you can look at it whatever way you want. You can say that that's too strong. No, it isn't. While they're singing your ballads and claiming to be deeply rooted in your arts, heritage and culture, they're holding a gun to your children's head. They are effectively failing to implement your constitution. They are basically pirate thugs who got an education. They're criminals. And I won't say more. So, as I said, they will attack you where you're ignorant, and they lead you to that uncertainty, because in uncertainty they have opportunity to misrepresent, and it's through misrepresentation that they can lead you to let go of what are your rights through your ignorance, or through what you've been led to believe is the case when it's not actually the case. So it's so fundamental to democratic society that the constitution of that land is upheld, that anything, any legislature, any bill or act or statute or anything that would fight against the preservation and upholding of the Constitution and certainty in it, and certainty that all the legislature's acts and statutes are not fighting against it. Anything that fights against that clarity that I'm talking about as to what the law is, and that clarity that what we have written down as legislature or acts and statutes doesn't fight against the law, that clarity there is absolutely paramount, vital and central to the upholding and upkeep of the common good. And so anything that fights against what I've just talked about is treason. It is sedition. It is the most heinous crime that anybody can commit while pretending to care about Ireland. They don't care about Ireland. They're fighting against your children's inheritance, the common good, the actual implementation of their rights. I mean, you can have rights written down on a piece of paper, but if you're not implementing them, they're no use to you. Written down. They have to be implemented. That's what the government are there to do. But our government are not even talking about the very basics of the constitutional rights that we're afforded for the upholding and the upkeep of the common good, which is the integrity of your house, your mammy and your daddy and your children all having time together, having time to talk and relate, and enough money when daddy goes to work full time to pay all the bills, and be sure that they have enough such that they would have a little bit left over for a rainy day, or to help a neighbour who's struggling or whatever. And that's all good because it allows people to help each other. But that's what Satan and the evil governments don't want. They don't want people to be able to help each other because they want you to be slaves to them and less than slaves, because at least slaves get all their needs met beyond the term they serve as a slave. Because traditionally in the Bible, the term slave had a different meaning to like what it has been attached to it or associated with it through like slave driving. That's different, like where you'll have slaves and you'll treat them really, really badly and poorly and starve them, and that's not actually what a slave is. That's something less than a slave. A slave is somebody who is working off a debt. That's what a slave is. So the slave actually comes out of that having profited, because they profited the amount they worked off, and probably more besides, because they learned from doing the work that they were doing. They learned a craft, a trade, and built a rapport with the people they were paying off by their labour. So oftentimes they'd come away having profited from being a slave, which is a completely different concept to what people now believe a slave is, because of the black slavery thing, and people selling people into slavery and profited off them, where they were eventually abused, misused, even unto death in some cases, but not in all cases either. In America, in some cases, the blacks were like part of the family. They were slaves, but they were treated as members of the family in certain households, so you can't tar them all with the same brush. But having said all of that, people now in Ireland are less than slaves. They might appear to be well fed and well dressed and well cultured, but if you don't have the integrity of your household because daddy's not getting paid enough, you are less than a slave. And I'm telling you, Ireland, they have made a mockery out of you, your constitution, your heritage, De Valera, the pikeman, all of that, when they wrote down the term presumptively constitutional. And Ireland's supposed to be renowned as having some of the best educational institutions in the world, and then they would write down presumptively constitutional. The president would function on that basis? Are they for real? They're cowboys. They're not qualified to do the job. They might have the acumen, the intelligence, the certification, even the studies, but they're inept because they're not doing the rudiments. They're not even discussing gainful employment. They're talking about living wage and minimum wage and things they make up and hash up themselves, and not what's actually written in the Constitution, which is gainful employment, which means that dad will have enough to pay for his house and everything the family needs, and have a little bit left over, which is what it should be. And are Ireland claiming they're incapable of facilitating that? Well, then you need to swap out your government. Ireland can be farmed 3 seasons out of 4. If they upgraded the polytunnels and all that, they could probably farm and grow food year round, because we don't have extreme temperatures, plenty of water, and a good measure of sunlight. But we could grow food all year round, no problem. We could be leading in the entire earth on that if we would develop that. And what are they doing? Telling the farmers not to farm. They have been strategically orchestrating a collapse of this economy since they overlent money in the Celtic Tiger. To young people that didn't fully understand economics. They saw an easy target and they tried to entrap them through poverty by lending them money that they knew would lose its value. That's entrapment. So they orchestrated that collapse. These are highly precise surgical criminals, a cabal in operation with demons and the devil Satan, and they have taken a step too far. Presumptively constitutional exposes them from top to bottom. What president who is custodian of the Constitution in Ireland, who's supposed to uphold it and be sure that anything he passes his desk into the legislature is constitutional and doesn't fight against the precepts and conventions of this nation for the purposes of the upkeep of the common good, which is the preservation of the family unit? Because the country is a whole lot of families. And if you're not taking care of the individual families through the regulation, then you're not doing it. Giving us a few top-ups every now and again is waffle. That's only pretending to be helping people. The conversation should be had around gainful employment. And they're not having that conversation. Why? Because they're not trying to help you. But it says in the Constitution under the family, it says it must be the endeavour of the government to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that a mother leaves the house and goes to work. So our forefathers, they knew, they were wise enough to know, if you send mammy out of the house, the country falls apart. And why was mammy sent out of the house? Because daddy wasn't earning enough. Why? Because they weren't talking about gainful employment. They were talking about minimum wage and living wage. So if they don't talk about gainful employment, they're criminals. So what do they have to be talking about? Gainful employment. Not making up their own terms, which are undefined. Minimum wage is not defined. Applying an arbitrary figure to the least amount lawfully allowed to be paid to somebody is stupid. What we need to do is define why we're choosing to pay people that amount of money, so that it's the why that decides the figure. It's the definition and the function of that amount that determines what that amount is. Not just an amount you pluck out of the air because it's more than we had last year. That's stupid. If it's not enough, it's not enough, even if it's a little bit more than last year. Are you getting the point? So if you're not going to actually apply the proper definition of gainful employment, which is what God told us what it is, work with your hands so that when you have done so, you have a little bit left over to help your friend in need. Oh, so I have to have a bit left over to help my friend in need. Yeah, what's that? Gain. It's a bit of profit, a bit of gain after you've paid all your bills. Well, people say, well, there's actually nothing written in the Irish Constitution that you have a right to a house. Yes, there is. Gainful employment. Do you think it's reasonable for anybody to deduce that has their faculty that you would have gainful employment and not a house? And not be able to afford a house? That's hardly gainful, is it? Yeah, I've gainful employment on the street. That's ridiculous. But it's not actually written into... Yes, it is. gainful employment. That you'll have all your needs met, one of which is a house. Come on, we're getting it. You'll have all your needs met and have a little bit left over. You'll have all your needs met except a house and a little bit left over. No. Gainful employment is gainful. It sees no deficit. Lacking a house is a deficit. Do we have to spell everything out so the crooks employ the basics of logic? Seriously. Gainful employment, if you want, is the minimum amount that can be lawfully paid to somebody. You could call gainful employment minimum wage. But it's far away from what they're now calling the minimum wage amount. Far away from it. Like, they have impoverished you such that you're probably only getting 20% of minimum wage or something like that of gainful employment at the current minimum wage rate. You're probably at 20%. Do you see how poor they've made you? Your current government? Yay, let's do Irish dancing and sing ballads. Hey, woo, wave the flag, bang the drum. But at the end of the day, they're not even talking about gainful employment. They couldn't care less. They're a bunch of pirates that would sell you out tomorrow and have already sold you out. They're letting them in the back door, letting Europe in through the local governments. There's a policy there from Europe there. What do we do with that? Well, is it an extension of the Constitution of Ireland? Or does it fight against it? They're only interested in what Worshipful Master said down the Freemasonic Lodge of Wizards. They don't care what your Constitution says. They don't, clearly. Presumptively constitutional. What's that? That's nothing. That's them basically telling you to do something and then telling you, you better pretend it's the law. You better pretend it's the law. That's what presumptively constitutional is. Trepidation, apprehension of danger if you don't do what we tell you to do and pretend it's the law. It's that waggy finger stage now. They're getting a bit confident, you know what I mean? Let's wag the finger at them. They seem to be going a bit stupid and in terms of, a bit ignorant, the wrong word. They seem to be going a bit ignorant now on what is the term. We better be very, very careful now. They seem to be going a bit ignorant now on what it is that the Constitution says. Let's start wagging our finger at them now. See if we can club them over the head with their own ignorance now. And when they wag the finger, you mightn't get your top up now if you don't do what we tell you. You see, they're getting confident and cocky now that they have the people where they want them. The government do what we tell them to do. And if they lose sight of that dynamic, they're in big trouble. Presumptively constitutional is sedition, and it's Satan. So it needs to be removed. Blessings in Jesus' name.